Sure, thanks Christian. Again, I'm Brantley Tyndall. I'm the director of BikeWalkRVA at Sportsbackers. I've been the lead advocate for the Fall Line Trail since before it had a name in 2017. And in my day job, I sort of coordinate and grow the advocacy movement for biking and walking and active transportation in the Richmond region. And as much as possible, I don't want it to just be like the Brantley show. It's really about growing a really strong and effective grassroots community that is advocating for themselves. And so our primary program is called the BikeWalkRVA Academy, where we train 20 people a year in 5 to 8 week program to learn about how government administration works, how transportation funding and design works, how to lead a neighborhood organizing team, where the funding comes from, and how to make change. So far we've had 220 people go through our program, and they really are the foundation for any active transportation development you've seen in the Richmond region for the past 10 years, because they show up to meetings, they're really articulate, they know how to organize themselves, and they've been the reason why Richmond in 2014, Chesterfield in 2015, Henrico in 2016, and Hanover in 2017 each passed some form of a bike plan. Those were some big fights, particularly Chesterfield and Hanover, where we had to beat the Tea Party, and really an institutionalized opposition to basically anything. And once that was completed, and I say that like that was 5 years of my life, but that took some time. Once that was possible, my team and I were able to basically draw the longest line we could from Ashland to the southern border of Chesterfield, which and the southern portion is a converted railway, so we said, well, why don't we keep going a little farther? So we took it into Petersburg, and we created the original concept for the Fall Line, then called the Ashland to Petersburg Trail. 7 localities, 43 miles, 2 planning districts, and we got letters of support from all 7 localities to say, hey, can we work on this? This was 2019. They probably thought we didn't have much chance to be successful, but they said yes. We went to VDOT in 2019, got a study, got a corridor alignment in 2020, and since then we've raised $280 million to build the trail, and we're about to have a groundbreaking in Richmond on Wednesday to now have 4 localities of the 7 with an active transportation project or an active development project for this trail. It's got a lot of momentum. It promises a lot of great things. It's a signature biking and walking project. It's not like a kind of stuck in some other kind of project like a lot of bike lanes might seem to be. They just kind of move lines on the road and hope that this ends up being a great project. I'm not being critical here. I think a lot of our bike lanes are great. Wish we could build them a little faster. But this project is much more about taking all the successes of the Virginia Capitol Trail, which is 1 million people use it a year. It's basically perfectly safe, as much as you can make anything perfectly safe in this regard. But instead of making it primarily rural, actually connecting people where they live, where they go to work, where they play, crosses 3 rivers, existing and new economic development opportunities. That's the real vision, is people are actually going to use it instead of it being kind of a weekend afternoon kind of recreational amenity. We hired a private firm to do some both analysis and also to develop our Fall Line Vision Plan, which is basically a placemaking plan. You can find it on our website, falllinetrail.org, also falllineva.org. It's a pretty robust menu, essentially, of what we think could be a great list of places and developments along the trail that highlight the different localities. So Hanover doesn't have to look like Richmond, doesn't have to look like Colonial Heights, and really they shouldn't. Like, there should be a lot of variety, and we should let our localities take the lead on their own kind of personality. And it means that if you're a trail user, you have a reason to go outside of your normal neighborhood and see something new. So that was released earlier this year, so we have a lot. We're at the beginning of that story. I don't work for any of our governments, local or state or any. I work with them. So the role that we play as a nonprofit is boosting and helping to coordinate the fundraising that is required for building the trail. But also, we can raise private money. We can do our own private work to implement placemaking along the way. So parks, connections to schools, new art installations, new landscaping. A big one that comes up a lot is Heat Island, and how the development of the Fall Line, particularly in South Richmond, is going to be an opportunity for planting new trees. And Route 1 and Commerce Road, Belmead, where there is essentially no tree canopy. And the subject that I was invited to talk about today is development at Southside, and how it's my sort of best guess as a partially trained urban planner that development pressure in Manchester is going to continue to head south along Commerce Road and Route 1, and it's not going to look the same in 10 or 15 years. And the best opportunity for things like affordable housing and mixed-use housing development, and the flavor that I'm most interested in, I call trail-oriented development. So it's sort of dense development that has its front door, and that could look a lot of different ways, to the trail instead of to the parking lot. And the parking lot is in the back of a parcel, and in often cases probably argue to be smaller as well. It's lessons that we've learned from Indianapolis and Atlanta and New York City and places that have really signature trails that accommodate a lot of people. They're going to bring development pressure, and that's going to scare some people. That there's like displacement, or what we might call gentrification, which is I think not the proper term, but displacement of through land value increases and development pressure. Things are this is going to it's happening in cities around the country. You're watching it happen in some places in Richmond. We could find ourselves 10 years from now thinking that the fall line is a boogeyman, but really I'd like to encourage people to think of it as an opportunity for creating the community that we want to have, particularly in Southside, which on Route 1 and Commerce Road, there's not much residential. Like, it's an opportunity for new residential that doesn't exist now. It's a lot of low intensity use, like vehicle storage, cold storage, and light industrial type stuff. With a great view of downtown and a great view of the river. So I guess I'm here as Strongtown, your urbanists, or like quasi-urbanist advocates, like thinking about what that part of the city is going to look like with this driver of active transportation and quality of life, and what we can do to ensure that it doesn't get out from under us and just become kind of status quo development that is uninteresting and doesn't achieve a lot of our affordability and accessibility goals. And ultimately, like, I don't want the fall line to become an exclusive nicety for people, but actually like ingrained in the community, that why people live in a place and to get to school and grocery stores, that sort of thing. And so I'm not an authority on this. I'm sort of, I recognize that I'm an opportunity to meet a lot of people that have expertise in certain areas, and affordable housing, land trust type action, I think, is probably ripe in the next couple of years, if not before that, particularly on Route 1. There are a lot of parcels that I think, if they aren't picked up pretty soon, are going to be picked up by developers. And the thing, I know enough about development to know they're smarter than a lot of us, and they've got the numbers, they have the data, they know how to analyze this stuff. It's difficult to outgame them. So the best thing that you can do is try to think about the big movement of things and anticipating the place where you want to go before it's enticing to them. So I'm sort of at the end of my expertise on that, and I think probably it's about as much time as you wanted me to orate, but I'm happy to take some questions. I'm sure there's a lot about the fall line that I have not talked about. It's like my life's work right now. But I'm happy to talk about the fall line in general, or what we think about the south side and it's sort of the pros and cons of what's kind of on the horizon. Yes, ma'am.
What do you work out about Bryan Park?
The trail, as currently planned, and there's a groundbreaking on Wednesday, is to pave a new trail through Bryan Park. It's 0.8 miles. There are 3 or so people in the community who are not related to the Friends of Bryan Park who have gone to the media and gotten outsized attention for their claim that there should be no pavement in Bryan Park. But unlikely that's going to be the case. A new trail is basically, it'd be a terrible scenario if we build 43 miles and the worst section is in the easiest place to build a trail in Bryan Park. It's a place that is in dire need of ADA access and pedestrian dedicated space, in a place where it's very busy around soccer, it's very busy around the big market, and part of the park is closed every week for bike racing. And so what are you supposed to do in that scenario? So there's a lot of consensus and good design around building the new trail, but there's a lot of smoke in the air that we're trying to clear, and I think it'll be cleared a lot by Wednesday.
How wide is the trail?
So that's a great question. Now I'll give you a complicated answer for a very simple question. How wide is the trail? We're using the Virginia Capitol Trail as a model, which is 10 feet wide in most cases. The older sections can be 8 in the rural areas. We've gotten our VDOT in our region, all 7 localities, to agree that the minimum standard should be 10, and we're going to see 12 in a lot of places. And by 12, I mean the actual asphalt paved part of it. Some sections will have 1 to 2 feet of gravel buffer on each side. That's just a best practice for the keeping it maintained and drained well. And a lot of like mountain bikers and runners will also appreciate using that, and it helps keep some of the foliage and stuff from growing too closely. There are some sections where my job is to push for good quality, and so there are some sections that are going to be very popular, and I would like for them to be wider early on. Like let's just get it right the first time instead of having to come back and retrofit. Some sections of the Beltline in Atlanta are upwards of 20 feet because it's just a throng of people like multiple times a day. So this is a bit of an aside. Sometimes in the rural area, you'll find people will fight your project because they think, oh, it's going to bring in riffraff, it's going to bring in drug dealers, people are going to steal my TV. By the way, I've never seen a documented case of a TV being stolen on a bike ever. And if you're worried about that thing, wait till you find out about roads. But they're just scared of change, and the actual academic research that I've done, or the sort of research I've tried to find, suggests if you're actually worried about safety, it's user conflicts that you actually have to worry about. Bike riders hitting bike riders hitting strollers, etc. So width is the solution to all of that. But we have both state government and all 7 localities are committed to 10 feet or more for the whole thing.
Yeah. Where has it been hardest to like get the ground running at construction in the fall line?
That is a great question. We're at the beginning of our story, so it's been sort of on paper for 3 or 4 years. It just really broke ground in earnest in October, and an relatively easy section. So the section in Lakeside behind the old Bank of America building, a third of a mile on county-owned property is kind of easy to do. The northern 5 miles, we broke ground in April. That's from the Ashland all the way across the Chickahominy, so all of Ashland, all of Hanover, a little bit of Henrico. That's all being done in one phase, and it should be done next year. So we haven't really hit any roadblocks yet. I will say from a construction standpoint, VDOT underscoped the southern 10 miles. It's all being done in one 10-mile section. It's called design build. What it means is it's an efficient way to administer the project. It means that VDOT can hire one partnership, a designer and the builder, and it requires less back and forth between VDOT and the contractors. They won't be able to do that through like downtown Richmond because it's too complicated. But for the easy sections, like engineering-wise, they can do a big chunk at once. That's what they're doing for the northern section as well. They just didn't ask CSX if they needed to build a bridge over a railroad line. They thought they'd be able to cross that grade, and then CSX came back and said, "Oh yeah, we're going to make you build a bridge over this." And it's like, "Oh, that's $30 million we didn't really think about." So that's just kind of part and parcel for transportation planning. It's hard. It's very difficult to plan a 43-mile trail and not get everything right at the first blush. And they probably had a handshake agreement with CSX at one time that was 5 years old, and then they got called on it later down the line. So kind of stinks. I hate to sort of say, oh, now we have to go get $30 million more, but it is what it is, and it's moving forward. Sure.
About a grocery store in Southside, do you see that as a potential?
So I've been on the periphery of grocery store development a little. Sportsbackers, who is my parent company, has been supported by UCrops since the beginning, and we've had like really good insight on the economics of grocery stores from basically the Richmond market leader for 30 years. And then we were a low-key kind of supporter partner of the market at 25th in the East End. Really, like, I'm not claiming any special credit for that, but in that time, I've learned that the economics of grocery stores are very difficult, right? And you hear that a lot. If you look into the stuff, it's how many people can access it, our margins are very low, how do you size it right? And I think the recipe for a grocery store on Southside, one, is beyond my expertise, but if we're talking about how it might relate to the fall line, you need more people there. And so I sort of see the fall line as creating a partial solution for what's a much bigger picture, which is you need the density of people who can walk and bike in an area to make that sort of thing more feasible. And I go to cities around the country, and they have neighborhood markets that are like really effective grocery stores. They don't have to be a supermarket. You can get most of the things that you need there. And the things that you don't, you make your special chips every once in a while, right? Like, that's not how Richmonders, I think, tend to want to go to the grocery store. They want load their SUV up with stuff like in once a month or something. But I think we can be part of the solution. And I think that's the best that I can get there. All right.
Yeah,
Sure.
unrelated, sort of related, I guess. Mayo Bridge is getting rebuilt. I haven't kept track of that, but there's been any input on that.
So we had a big meeting with 7 or 8 partner organizations back in May. And that was right when days after we learned that the pylons were going to have to be removed and the scope of the replacement of the Mayo Bridge is going to double. And got a lot of people talking about livability. So if we're going to build a $200 million bridge, and I made that number up, so don't quote me on that one. But it's pretty realistic. It's a realistic ballpark. If we're going to, it's a once in a lifetime replacement of a bridge, and we have to make sure that we're not preventing people from biking and walking over it effectively for the next 100 years. So we are growing our coalition sort of slowly, but the next step, I just learned this week that there's a citizen information meeting later this month that we're going to help publicize. Not later this month, in September. I think it's the 16th, but we'll make sure you know about it. And we are expecting to see 3 different designs that VDOT and the city have put together, one of which has a road diet on it. So I don't want to get out front of my skis and telling you any of the details because I'm sure I'll get something wrong. But in a couple of weeks, you're going to see something more. And generally speaking, what we have learned is that we don't expect to see the actual replacement, like the construction, for 3 years. And we know that they are evaluating one set of options that may allow the bridge itself to only be closed for less than a year, which is basically building a new bridge next to the current bridge and then using that current bridge in the operations of building the new one so that they can get the new one operational before they take the old one out. That doesn't necessarily mean anything about what that new bridge is going to look like other than it's not in the exact same footprint. So the other big constraint is the width of the openings of the flood wall. I do know they're not trying to change that. So there are some constraints. From a fall line standpoint, it is actually somewhat related. If you go to the website, our website, or the Plain RVA website, the city's website, there is a line on a map for how the fall line will go through downtown. But truly, you won't know, particularly downtown where the grid, you could basically pick any number of streets to get through downtown. We won't really know the alignment there until the city has funding to pay engineers to evaluate options. It just takes time to figure out where the utilities are. It just isn't simple. It's not a cynical thing. It's just not simple. Yeah, you have to evaluate how much it's going to cost per block based on curb widths and sidewalk widths and where the utilities are, what other projects are in the pipeline. It just takes a lot of time to do that. And so I would just say take that with a grain of salt and from Jackson Ward to the river. And then we don't know exactly how it's going to connect to the Virginia Capitol Trail. We know it's going to, I would bet everything that it's going to connect well to the Virginia Capitol Trail. But do we use the Canal Walk? Do we use Bird Street? Do we use Mayo Bridge? And I'm starting to kind of angle my advocacy towards the Mayo Bridge. One, because I think it'll help the Mayo Bridge in the long term, but because Whole Street really has the opportunity to be like a Main Street kind of destination. It's made some great strides. It's just not quite there yet. And having that be the main connector between the Fall Line Corridor and the Virginia Capitol Trail does a lot of great things from a tourism and recreation standpoint and a local business standpoint on Whole Street and in that corridor. So there's a lot to be determined between now and then, but there's a fair amount of support in the city in that concept.
I have another question. So this past Saturday, I was biking.
That's a great question. We do a lot of community engagement. We have for a long time. But the best way to measure it is usually in public hearings, public surveys, that kind of thing. And so where there has been the most support in a quantifiable way has been in Richmond Connects, where there were, and I just saw this today, so these are in the remarks for the administration for the groundbreaking on Wednesday for the Fall Line. But there were 20,000 or so comments about in Richmond Connects, which is Richmond's multimodal transportation plan that had a dedicated path to equity focus, like how they wanted to focus their transportation planning was about equity and in particular investing in places that haven't been invested in a long time. So South Richmond is a great example. And they were overwhelmingly positive. I think the percentage is 75% positive of the Fall Line Trail. And they did very, very targeted focusing. And we worked on with the Office of Equitable Transportation and Mobility throughout the summer, I think of 21, when they were doing a lot of this engagement in Southside community centers and parks in order to really like connect with communities that maybe don't really talk about this very much. And we similarly partner as often as we can with BikeWalkRVA, Southside Relief, and other local nonprofits that really have a good ground game there. And I was on the board of BikeWalkRVA in 2012, and one of the main focuses in their initial strategic plan was create an active transportation connection from Belmead Community Center and Oak Grove Elementary to and across the river. And this is going to be basically that thing. It's just taken 15 years to do it. So we have some organizational support, we have some neighbor support. Community engagement is tricky though, because you will always have someone come out of the woodwork and say, I haven't heard this, I don't like it. And so like, you kind of have to have mature expectations about what community conversations can be like, even if you have, mixed opinions about things. So I think we're doing a good job and we have a lot of support.